My stepmother shoved me backward down a flight of concrete basement stairs because I showed my father the hidden offshore wire transfers from his business accounts. He just stepped over my body and muttered that maybe this would finally teach me to respect my elders. The heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. A second later, the deadbolt engaged with a loud metallic thud that echoed off the cinder block walls. I lay at the bottom of the steps, gasping for air. The pain wasn't a sharp stab, it was a deep, nauseating burn, radiating from my right collarbone straight down into my ribs. I tasted copper and concrete dust. The basement was dark, illuminated only by the pale afternoon light filtering through a single egress window near the ceiling. I tried to push myself up using my right arm, and my vision immediately tunneled, the edges turning a fuzzy, vibrating black. I collapsed back onto the cold floor, panting, cradling my right arm against my chest with my left hand. I didn't scream. There was no point. My father, Jack Harlow, had built Harlow Commercial Site Development from a single rusted Ford F-150 into a multi-million-dollar contracting empire. He was a hard, stubborn man who demanded absolute loyalty and rarely admitted when he was wrong. Shouting for him to come back and unlock the door would only reinforce whatever twisted justification Valerie had just fed him. I couldn't go back up the stairs. I had to drag myself 30 feet across the unfinished concrete floor to the old wooden bulkhead doors that led out to the backyard. It took me 20 agonizing minutes. Every inch I moved sent a sickening grind through my shoulder. When I finally reached the bulkhead, I had to shove the rusted iron latch open using only my left hand, pushing the heavy wooden doors up against the weight of the April rain. I crawled out into the mud. I didn't look back at the house. I just kept moving, stumbling around the perimeter of the lawn to where my car was parked in the driveway. It was a silver Toyota RAV4, technically a fleet vehicle registered to the company, but it had been my daily driver for 3 years. I managed to get the door open and dropped into the driver's seat, soaked in mud and freezing rain. I drove to the emergency room one-handed. My right arm was tucked into my jacket like a broken wing. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by a cold, shivering shock. Every pothole on the county road felt like a hammer striking my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about the look on his face. He hadn't been surprised when she pushed me. He hadn't panicked when I hit the concrete. He just looked down at me with cold annoyance, as if I had spilled a glass of water on his rug. When I finally pulled into the loading zone at County General, I couldn't even put the car in park properly. I just left it running at the curb and stumbled through the sliding glass doors. The triage nurse, a woman named Miriam with tired eyes and a tight bun, took one look at the unnatural slump of my right shoulder and the pale, sweaty sheen on my face, and immediately grabbed a wheelchair. Within an hour, I was in a hospital gown, shivering under a thin, heated blanket while an X-ray technician moved heavy plates around my chest. My collarbone was shattered in 3 places. I also had a grade 3 concussion. They started an IV of Dilaudid, and as the heavy, synthetic warmth flooded my veins, the reality of the last 18 months played on a loop in my head. I should have known better than to confront him directly. I should have gone straight to the police. But he was my dad. I thought the truth, printed out in black and white, would snap him out of it. Valerie had walked into his office 12 years ago, applying for a payroll manager position. She was 15 years younger than him, sharp, hyper-attentive, and always smelled like expensive vanilla perfume. He married her within 11 months. Almost immediately, the dynamic in the house changed. She moved her desk into the home office. She had a heavy, solid oak door installed. She bought a commercial-grade cross-cut paper shredder. I was in college at the time, but whenever I came home and walked into the office to grab a pen or print a shipping label, she would instantly minimize her browser tabs, offering a tight, practiced smile until I left the room. My dad trusted her completely. He hated dealing with the accounting side of the business. He was a dirt and diesel guy. As long as the crews were paid and the trucks were running, he didn't care how the spreadsheets looked. He handed her full financial control without a second thought. 18 months ago, I decided I'd had enough of the secrecy. I work as a network administrator for a local school district. I know how easily things can be hidden, and how easily they can be found. One weekend when they were out of town, I bypassed the password on the home office desktop and installed a silent, cloud-syncing screen recorder. It wasn't malware. It was a simple, invisible background script. Every time the mouse clicked, it took a screenshot, logged the keystrokes, and quietly uploaded the encrypted data to an Oz server I rented for $12 a month. I didn't do it to destroy her. I just wanted to know what she was so desperate to hide. And then, for a year and a half, I did nothing with it. I let the data pile up. Over 500 gigabytes of raw logs sat on my server. I told myself I was just keeping it as an insurance policy, just in case. I never sifted through the archive until their 10th anniversary this past Tuesday. My dad had rented out a local Italian restaurant for a surprise celebration. He asked me to go to the house in the afternoon to set up some floral arrangements before they got back from her salon appointment. I was in the kitchen, trimming the stems of white lilies, when her iPad chimed on the granite counter. The screen lit up. A preview notification from a secure messaging app flashed on the lock screen. It read, "Liquidation complete. The Cayman account receives the final $180K on Thursday." I stood frozen at the kitchen island for 2 full minutes. The lilies slipped out of my hand and scattered across the floor. I didn't clean them up. I ran upstairs, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Oz bucket. It took me 7 hours to untangle the web she had woven. I sat at my dining room table, drinking cold coffee, watching a year and a half of systematic embezzlement unfold in time-stamped screenshots. Valerie had been bleeding Harlow Landscaping dry with terrifying precision. First, I found the fake vendor invoices. She had created a phantom LLC called Apex Supply and was regularly transferring $20,000 to $30,000 a month into its accounts, classifying them as material expenses. Then I found the loans. She had forged my dad's signature on a series of DocuSign applications, taking out $250,000 $100,000 in high-interest liens against his heavy machinery, 3 Caterpillar 320 excavators, and a fleet of Bobcat skid steers. But the worst part was the crypto wallet. She was taking the loan money and the fake vendor payouts, converting them into USD stablecoins through a hardware wallet, and funneling exactly $412,500 into a shell company called Sunward Holdings, registered in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. And then I found the messages. She was running WhatsApp web on the desktop. I had hundreds of screenshots of her chats with a contact named Silas. He was the fitness instructor she saw 3 mornings a week. They weren't just sleeping together. They were coordinating the Cayman accounts. They were looking at real estate in Costa Rica. And that final Thursday transfer, that was the kill shot. She was planning to drain the last of the operating capital, bankrupt the business, and flee the country with Silas before the first machinery loan defaulted. I didn't call the police. I exported everything, printed a 150-page binder of irrefutable screenshots and bank routing numbers, and drove to the house. I walked into the living room. My dad was sitting in his leather recliner, watching a baseball game. I turned off the television and dropped the heavy binder on his lap. I walked him through every page. I showed him the forged signatures. I showed him the crypto transfers. I showed him the texts with Silas where they laughed about how easily he handed over the banking fobs. He stared at the pages for a long time. His face was entirely unreadable. Then he stood up, walked over to the liquor cabinet, poured a glass of Maker's Mark, and looked at me. "Sweetheart, Valerie is just restructuring the corporate taxes," he said, his voice flat. "You've always been jealous of her. You've never wanted to see me happy." I lost my temper. I pointed out the glaring discrepancies between the real bank balances and the doctored reports she handed him every quarter. I told him he was going to lose the company by Friday. He told me I was delusional. Then he pulled out his phone, called Valerie at the salon, and told her I was at the house with a wild conspiracy theory. Valerie rushed home 15 minutes later. She didn't look panicked. She stormed past me in the hallway, yanked open the basement door, and sharply demanded I come down to help her fetch some tax boxes to prove me wrong. I followed her, genuinely thinking she was going to try and negotiate, to offer some kind of excuse, or beg me not to go to the authorities. I was standing on the second step when she stopped, turned around, and planted both hands flat against my chest. I woke up in the hospital recovery room on Wednesday morning. My right shoulder felt heavy and stiff. A surgeon had inserted a titanium plate and 6 screws to put my collarbone back together. My head throbbed in time with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Nurse Miriam came in to check my vitals. She looked at me with a soft, pitying expression. "The police are here to take your statement," she said quietly. "Are you up for it?" "I need a federal investigator," I told her, my voice raspy from the intubation tube. "This isn't just an assault. It's wire fraud. It's embezzlement." She nodded soothingly, the way you nod at a child, and stepped out. A few minutes later, a uniformed local police officer walked in. His name tag read Duncan. He carried a small black notepad. He didn't look like a man who was here to solve a crime. He looked like a man who was here to process paperwork. "Miss Harlow," Officer Duncan said, standing at the foot of my bed. "How are you feeling?" "I want to report an assault," I said, trying to push myself up on my good elbow. My stepmother pushed me down a flight of concrete stairs. My father witnessed it and locked the door, leaving me in the basement. And I need a financial crimes detective. I have proof of massive corporate fraud. Duncan didn't write anything down. He just sighed, flipping his notepad shut. "Miss Harlow, your father and your stepmother came into the precinct about 3 hours ago. They filed a report regarding an incident at their home last night." I stared at him. "They filed a report? Your father stated that you came over to the house in a highly agitated state. He said, you have a history of paranoia and financial anxiety. According to his statement, you demanded money, became violent, and while attempting to grab a box of documents from your stepmother, you tripped on the basement rug and fell." "A rug?" I choked out, a laugh catching in my throat and turning into a cough that sent fire through my collarbone. "I tripped on a rug? The basement is unfinished concrete. There is no rug." "They brought the rug into the precinct, ma'am," Duncan said evenly. "It had your blood on it. They also brought their corporate attorney. Your father is choosing not to press charges against you for the extortion attempt, given your mental state. But he did ask me to collect the keys to the company vehicle you drove here." I felt the blood drain from my face. They hadn't just pushed me. They had spent the entire night building a firewall. They fabricated a crime scene, hired a lawyer with the stolen money, and completely discredited me before I even woke up from surgery. "It's a lie," I said, my voice shaking. "It's a complete lie. Check my phone. I have the Oz logs. I have 150 pages of screenshots showing her moving the money." I reached over to the plastic hospital tray where my belongings were bagged. I pulled out my phone with my left hand and unlocked it. I tapped the Oz app to pull up the server where the logs were stored. Access denied. Password incorrect. I frowned, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to reset the password. An error message popped up stating the recovery email had been changed. I opened my Gmail app. I was logged out. I tried to log back in. The password had been changed 2 hours ago. My father paid the family cell phone plan. He had administrative access to my device. He had remotely wiped my keychains and locked me out of my own accounts. Panic started to set in. I opened my banking app. I had a joint checking account with my dad left over from my college days, which I still used for my direct deposits because I had never bothered to separate them. Available balance, note cents. Savings, note cents. They had drained it. Every single cent from my paychecks, my emergency fund, everything. Officer Duncan was watching me with a look of mild boredom mixed with pity. "The keys to the RAV4, Ms. Harlow, unless you want them to report the vehicle as stolen." I numbly reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the Toyota key fob, and set it on the plastic tray. Duncan scooped it up. "I strongly suggest you follow up with the psychiatric resources the hospital provides," Duncan said softly. before turning and walking out of the room. I sat alone in the sterile room, listening to the hum of the air conditioning. I had no car. I had no money. I was locked out of the cloud server. The local police thought I was a violent, mentally unstable extortionist, and Valerie's final transfer of $180,000 to the Cayman Islands was scheduled to clear tomorrow morning. But they didn't know everything. They thought they had scrubbed my digital footprint. They thought taking my phone and draining my accounts would paralyze me. But I am a network administrator. I know that cloud servers can be wiped and phones can be bricked. Before I printed that binder yesterday, I had downloaded the entire 500-gigabyte archive, the unencrypted video files, the keystroke logs, and the WhatsApp screenshots onto a high-capacity master flash drive. I didn't bring the flash drive to the house. I had hidden it inside the plastic housing of the bathroom exhaust fan in my apartment. I hit the call button on the side of the bed. Nurse Miriam appeared a minute later. "I need to discharge myself," I said, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The room spun, but I gripped the plastic rail with my left hand to steady myself. "Against medical advice. Get me the paperwork." She tried to argue, citing the concussion and the fresh surgery, but I didn't have time to be a patient. I signed the AMA forms with a shaky left hand. My clothes were ruined from the mud and the scissors they used to cut my shirt off in trauma, so I left the hospital wearing a pair of paper scrub pants, my ruined jacket draped over my good shoulder, and non-slip hospital socks jammed into my muddy sneakers. I walked 3 blocks to a bus stop. I didn't have any cash, but I pleaded with the driver, showing him the fresh bandages and the hospital band still around my wrist. He took pity on me and let me ride for free to the east side of town. It took me an hour to get to my apartment complex. Every step jarred my collarbone. By the time I reached my floor, I was sweating through the scrubs, my teeth gritted against the pain. I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway to Unit 4B. The door was unlocked. I stopped. I pushed the door open with my foot. The apartment had been tossed, not by a burglar looking for electronics. My TV was still there, my cheap soundbar untouched. It was a targeted search. My desk drawers were pulled out and dumped on the floor. My desktop computer tower was completely gone, leaving only the monitor and a tangle of cables on the desk. The cushions on the couch were slashed. They had come looking for the data. They knew I had to have a local backup. I walked straight to the bathroom. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood on the edge of the bathtub, balancing carefully to avoid jarring my shoulder. With my good hand, I reached up to the plastic grate of the ceiling exhaust fan. I pulled down gently. The cover popped off, showering me with a layer of dust. I reached up into the metal housing. My fingers brushed against a piece of duct tape. I peeled it back and pulled down a small black SanDisk flash drive. It was safe. I had the master drive. I had the 18 months of irrefutable video evidence. I had the exact keystrokes of her transferring the funds. I stepped down from the tub, clutching the drive tightly in my left fist. I walked back out into the living room, planning to head straight to the FBI field office downtown, even if I had to walk the 5 miles to get there. But as I passed the kitchen island, I noticed a manila envelope sitting squarely in the center of the counter. It hadn't been there when I left yesterday. I set the flash drive down and opened the envelope. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. The letterhead belonged to Vance and Fletcher, the most aggressive corporate litigation firm in the county. It was an emergency ex parte injunction signed by a county judge at 8 a.m. that morning. It ordered the immediate freeze of all my personal assets, pending a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Attached to it was a 30-day eviction notice. My dad, I remembered with a sickening drop in my stomach, was the primary guarantor on my lease. He had called my landlord and surrendered the apartment, claiming I was being moved to a residential rehabilitation facility. I was standing in an apartment I no longer legally had the right to occupy, with no money, no car, and a shattered shoulder, holding a piece of plastic that could put my stepmother in federal prison. My dad had used the very money she stole to build a legal cage around me. They thought they had won. They thought they had suffocated the threat. I picked up the flash drive, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out the door. The afternoon heat was suffocating, pressing down on my shoulders and making my head throb in time with my pulse. I kept my right arm pinned against my ribs, terrified that any sudden movement would dislodge the titanium plate they had just screwed into my collarbone. People on the sidewalk stared at me, a pale, sweating woman in paper hospital scrubs and muddy sneakers, but I kept my eyes focused on the pavement ahead. My school district ID badge was still clipped to the inside of my ruined jacket. The district's Centralit hub was only 1.5 miles away. It felt like 10. I had to stop every couple of blocks to lean against a brick wall or a bus stop shelter, waiting for the nausea to pass. By the time I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the district building, my scrubs were soaked with sweat, and I was shaking uncontrollably. Garrett, my supervisor, was sitting at the front reception desk, arguing with a vendor on the phone. When he looked up and saw me, he dropped the receiver. "Jesus," he said, rushing around the desk. "What happened to you? Did you get hit by a car? I need a secure terminal." I rasped, my throat raw, air-gapped, "and I need a phone that hasn't been compromised. Garrett, I need you to call the FBI field office." He didn't ask questions. He took one look at my face, grabbed my good arm, and steered me past the reception area, through the double security doors, and into the back server room. It was freezing in there, the hum of the racks drowning out everything else. He pulled out an old metal folding chair and eased me into it. "Sit," he ordered. "Don't move. I'm getting the first aid kit and my cell." When he came back, he had a bottle of water and his iPhone. I gave him the number for the local FBI cybercrimes division, a number I had memorized hours ago from the hospital bed. While it rang, I pulled the black SanDisk flash drive from my pocket and set it on the metal desk. "Tell them you have a whistleblower," I said quietly. "Tell them it involves an active wire fraud case, offshore embezzlement, and an impending transfer of $180,000 scheduled for tomorrow morning." Garrett relayed the information. It took 40 minutes, 3 different transfers, and a lot of explaining, but eventually, a special agent named Callum agreed to send a financial crimes detective over to our location. Detective Callum arrived an hour later. He was a tall, weary-looking man in a cheap gray suit, carrying a heavy encrypted laptop case. He took one look at my hospital band, the mud on my shoes, and the rigid way I was holding my arm, and his expression hardened. "Your father filed an extortion report against you this morning," Callum said, pulling up a chair across from me. "Local PD flagged it. They have an injunction freezing your assets. They're looking for you right now for a mandatory psych evaluation." "I know," I said. I pointed to the flash drive on the desk with a trembling finger. "That's why I need you to look at this before local PD finds me. She's moving the last of the operating capital to Georgetown tomorrow. She's going to liquidate the company and leave the country." Callum didn't argue. He booted up his machine, inserted a secure dongle, and plugged in my flash drive. I sat in the freezing server room for 2 hours while he scrolled through the nightmare. He watched the keystroke logs. He looked at the forged DocuSign applications against the Caterpillar excavators. He read the WhatsApp transcripts between Valerie and Silas, the fitness instructor. His face never changed, but the speed at which he clicked through the files grew faster and faster. When he reached the final screenshot, the one showing the pending transfer to the Cayman Shell Company, scheduled for 8 Colo Am Thursday, he stopped. He closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "How far back do these logs go?" he asked, his voice deadpan. 18 months, I said. Callum stood up. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "I need an emergency asset freeze on Harlow Commercial Site Development," he barked into the receiver. "Yes, right now. And I need a flag on a passport. Name is Valerie Harlow." "No, she's a flight risk. She's moving tomorrow." I spent the night on Garrett's couch. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father stepping over my legs on the concrete stairs. I felt the phantom shove against my chest. At 6:15 am on Thursday, my phone, a burner Garrett had picked up for me at a gas station, buzzed. It was Callum. "We got her," he said. The background noise on his end sounded loud, echoing like a cavernous hall. Terminal 3 at O'Hare. She had a first-class ticket to San Jose, Costa Rica, and 2 suitcases full of designer clothes. The boyfriend Silas was waiting at the gate. He folded the second we put him in cuffs. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, so heavy I almost dropped the phone. "And the transfer?" "Frozen," Callum said. "The bank flagged it 20 minutes before it was scheduled to process. The Cayman account is empty. We have a team at your father's business right now seizing the hard drives." I didn't feel victorious. I just felt hollow. "And my dad? He's currently screaming at my agents, telling them you orchestrated this whole thing to frame her. He's trying to hire her a defense attorney using company funds." Callum paused, his voice softening just a fraction. "The funds don't exist anymore. The accounts are drained. The machinery loans are due. He's bankrupt." The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, physical therapy, and sitting in sterile conference rooms with federal prosecutors. The case against Valerie was overwhelming. The prosecutor called it the most cleanly packaged embezzlement case she had ever seen. I had handed them 18 months of high-definition, irrefutable proof. My father never called me. Even after the local PD dropped the ridiculous extortion charges, even after the injunction was lifted, even after Silas handed over every incriminating text message in exchange for a lighter sentence. My dad told his remaining business partners that I had hacked the accounts and set Valerie up out of spite. He clung to the delusion because the alternative, admitting that he had let a woman rob him blind, ruin his legacy, and nearly kill his only daughter, was too much for his pride to bear. Valerie didn't even try to fight it. Her court-appointed attorney took one look at the digital trail and advised her to take a plea deal. She got 9 years in federal prison. I thought that was the end of it. I moved into a new apartment across town, bought a cheap used Honda Civic, and tried to focus on healing my shoulder. The plate ached when it rained, a constant dull reminder of the basement stairs. Then, 3 weeks after her sentencing, I went down to the lobby to check my mail. Between the electric bill and a coupon flyer, there was a plain white envelope. No return address. The postmark was from a sorting facility 3 towns over. I carried it upstairs to my kitchen, grabbed a knife with my left hand, and sliced it open. Inside was a single, heavy piece of paper. It was a photocopy of a legal document. The top half was obscured by a black rectangle, deliberately redacted. But the bottom half was clear. It was a transfer of ownership form for Sunward Holdings, the Cayman Islands shell company Valerie had used to hide the money. There were 2 signatures at the bottom. The first was Valerie's. The second, bold and unmistakable in blue ink, belonged to my father, Jack Harlow. I stared at the page, my breath catching in my throat. I looked at the date next to his signature. It was dated October 14th. That was 2 weeks before I had even installed the screen recorder in the home office. My hands started to shake. I dropped the paper on the granite counter. He hadn't been a victim. He hadn't been a clueless, trusting husband who handed over the books because he hated spreadsheets. He knew. He had been a partner in the shell company from the very beginning. He hadn't stepped over my broken body on the basement stairs because he thought I was a delusional, jealous daughter attacking his innocent wife. He stepped over me because I had found the very operation he was helping to run. My burner phone buzzed on the counter next to the letter. The screen lit up with an unknown number. I hesitated, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked it up and hit accept. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I assume you got the mail," a man's voice said. It was smooth, calm, and vaguely familiar. "Who is this?" I demanded, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. "My name is Fletcher," the voice said. "I'm the corporate attorney your father hired on Tuesday morning to draft that eviction notice. I think it's time you and I had a conversation about where the rest of the machinery loans actually went." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just listened to the faint static on the line. The dull, constant ache in my right shoulder suddenly spiked, a sharp reminder of the concrete stairs. "You drafted the injunction that locked me out of my apartment," I said, my voice completely flat. "You helped him steal my car and freeze my bank accounts while I was in emergency surgery. Why the hell are you calling me?" "Because your father paid my $50,000 retainer counter with a cashier's check that the federal government just flagged as stolen capital, Fletcher said. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded furious. He didn't tell me his assets were compromised. He didn't tell me he was under federal investigation. I am a civil litigator. I do not participate in wire fraud, and I do not go to federal prison for my clients. Meet me at the West Side Diner in 20 minutes. Come alone. He hung up before I could answer. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the photocopy of the Cayman document. Jack Harlow hadn't just signed it. He had countersigned it as the primary managing director of Sunward Holdings. He had full control over the shell company. I grabbed my keys with my left hand, slid the document into my jacket pocket, and walked out the door. The West Side Diner was a dilapidated chrome tube sitting on the edge of the industrial park. It smelled like industrial bleach and burnt coffee. I slid into a red vinyl booth in the back. A few minutes later, Fletcher walked in. He was in his late 50s, wearing a very expensive navy suit that looked rumpled, as if he had slept in it. He carried a thick leather briefcase. He didn't order anything. He sat across from me, popped the brass latches on his briefcase, and pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it across the sticky table. "Your stepmother took a plea deal for 9 years, Fletcher said, keeping his voice low. She thought she was protecting Silas. She thought she got caught because she was careless with her iPad. She didn't. She got caught because your father served her up on a silver platter." I opened the folder. Inside were bank statements I hadn't seen before. They weren't for Harlow Commercial Site Development. They were for a private wealth management firm. "Look at the dates," Fletcher instructed. I scanned the columns. 3 years ago, my father had taken a massive, catastrophic hit in commercial real estate. He had partnered with a private equity investor named Pierce Kellner to build a sprawling logistics center on the county line. The zoning fell through. The EPA found protected wetlands on the site. The project died, and my father was left holding $12 million in toxic debt. "He was bankrupt 3 years ago," I said, tracing the negative balances with my finger, "before Valerie even started moving the money." "Exactly," Fletcher said. "Your father is a very proud, very ruthless man. He couldn't stomach the humiliation of a public corporate bankruptcy. He needed a way out that left him with a nest egg and zero liability. He knew Valerie was sleeping with the fitness instructor. He knew she was greedy, so he left the financial controls completely unprotected. He practically handed her the authorization fobs." I felt physically sick. The pieces were locking together in my mind, forming a picture far uglier than simple embezzlement. "He let her steal the money so the company would fail under her watch, not his. He didn't just let her steal it," Fletcher corrected. "He directed it. He co-founded Sunward Holdings with her. He made sure she felt comfortable moving the money offshore. The plan was simple. Let Valerie drain the last of the operating capital, let the company collapse, and let her flee to Costa Rica. He would play the devastated, betrayed husband. The creditors would write off the debt as a total loss due to criminal fraud. And a year later, Jack would quietly access the Cayman accounts and retire. But I ruined the timeline," I whispered. "You ruined everything," Fletcher said bluntly. "You installed that spyware 18 months ago. You built a pristine, undeniable paper trail of federal crimes. And then, on their anniversary, you dumped it on his lap. You forced his hand." My shoulder throbbed. I remembered the cold, blank look on his face in the living room. "Sweetheart, Valerie is just restructuring the corporate taxes." He wasn't in denial. He was calculating how to neutralize me. "That's why he pushed you," Fletcher said, watching my face. "He needed you out of the way immediately. He needed time to file the extortion report, freeze your credibility, and try to get Valerie on a plane before the FBI could verify your data. But you managed to get to the federal agents anyway." I closed the folder. "Valerie is in prison. The Cayman transfer was blocked. He lost the money." "No, he didn't." Fletcher leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table. "That's why I'm here. Jack didn't lose. He pivoted." "Open the second document in that folder." I flipped past the bank statements. The next document was a trust charter. It was heavily stamped by a notary public. The title read, "The Harlow Beneficiary Trust." I looked down at the listed beneficiary. It was my name. "What is this?" I asked, my voice tight. "Your father just filed a supplemental affidavit with the U.S. Attorney's Office," Fletcher said quietly. "He is claiming that he is innocent. He's claiming that Valerie didn't act alone. He told the federal prosecutors that you hated Valerie, hacked her devices, discovered her affair with Silas, and used it to blackmail her." I stared at him, the blood rushing in my ears. "That's insane." I went to the FBI. I handed them the drive. "And your father is arguing that you only went to the FBI because Valerie tried to cut you out at the last minute," Fletcher countered smoothly, laying out the trap exactly as a prosecutor would see it. "He's telling them you panicked when you saw she was moving the final $180,000 to the Caymans, a territory you couldn't access. According to Jack, you went to the feds as a jilted co-conspirator, trying to freeze the funds before she could steal your cut. They won't believe that. They have a local police report from the night of the assault where you were allegedly screaming for money," Fletcher pointed out. "They have hospital records showing you were agitated and uncooperative. And now, they have a trust document, signed by Jack months ago, showing that a portion of the stolen funds was quietly funneled into an account in your name. He set you up as the mastermind." I looked at the trust ledger. There were deposits dating back a year. Small amounts, $10,000 here, $15,000 there, all originating from the fraudulent Apex supply accounts. He had been quietly seeding a financial trail to my name for 12 months, just in case he needed a secondary scapegoat. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, looking up at Fletcher. "Because I am currently listed as his attorney of record on the civil filings, and the FBI raided my office 2 hours ago," Fletcher said, his jaw tightening. "They took my hard drives. They took my client files. Jack is trying to drag everyone down to save himself. I need you to go to your handler at the FBI. I need you to give them this folder, and I need you to broker me an immunity deal for the civil injunction I filed against you. If you do that, I will testify that Jack was fully aware of the Cayman accounts." He didn't wait for me to agree. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the diner, leaving the folder on the table. I sat alone in the booth for 20 minutes, listening to the clatter of silverware from the kitchen. My hands were shaking. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the burner phone Garrett had bought me, and dialed Agent Callum's direct line. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "Callum," he answered. "It's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have new information. I need to see you." My father orchestrated the whole thing. He was the one who set up the shell company with Valerie. I have the documents to prove it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Where are you right now?" Callum asked. His tone was wrong. It wasn't the brisk, professional tone of an agent talking to an informant. It was careful, measured. It was the exact tone he had used when he spoke to Silas in the interrogation room. "I'm at a diner," I said, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. "Callum, what's wrong?" "I need you to come down to the field office," Callum said slowly. "We've been reviewing some of the background processes on the spyware you installed. We also received a supplemental filing from your father's legal team this morning regarding a trust account in your name. We just need to clarify some timelines." I looked down at the folder on the table. Clarify some timelines. I was a network administrator. I knew exactly what that meant. They weren't looking at me as a whistleblower anymore. They were looking at me as a suspect. "I can be there in an hour," I lied. "We'd prefer to send a car for you," Callum said smoothly. "Just give me the address of the diner." "The Starlight on 4th, I lied, pulling the name of a breakfast place clear across town out of thin air. "But I have my car. I'll drive myself." I ended the call and immediately pressed the power button, holding it down until the screen went black. I popped the cheap plastic casing off the back, pulled out the battery, and left the pieces sitting on the sticky vinyl table next to the half-empty packet of sugar. My chest felt hollow, a cold vacuum where my lungs should be. Callum wasn't asking for my location to protect me. He was sending a team to detain me. Jack had successfully flipped the board. He had taken my pristine 500-gigabyte digital confession and weaponized it, painting himself as the victim of a coordinated extortion ring run by his own daughter and his unfaithful wife. I slid out of the booth, clutching Fletcher's manila folder against my ribs. I kept my head down as I walked out of the West Side Diner and back into the sweltering afternoon heat. My used Civic was parked 3 spots away, baking in the sun. I unlocked it manually. The electronic fob had died 2 days after I bought it, and dropped into the driver's seat. The vinyl burned through my thin scrub pants. I didn't turn the key. I just sat there, staring at the cracked dashboard, trying to force my brain to process the mechanics of what was happening. Callum had mentioned the background processes on my spyware. We've been reviewing some of the background processes. I am a network administrator. I built that script from scratch. It wasn't a complex piece of malware. It was a glorified macro. It recorded keystrokes, took screenshots, and synced them to the Oz server. But there was one critical flaw in my design, something I hadn't considered, because I never thought I would be the one under investigation. The script logged the active user session. It didn't verify the physical identity of the person sitting at the keyboard. I ripped open Fletcher's folder again, my hands shaking so badly I almost tore the heavy paper. I found the trust document, the Harlow Beneficiary Trust. It listed me as the primary beneficiary. The deposit started 12 months ago. I flipped to the back page, looking for the notary stamp. Notary Public, Reed Whitfield. Commission expires 2028. I knew that name. Reed Whitfield wasn't just a notary. He was the senior loan officer at the community bank my father used for Harlow commercial site development. He was a golf buddy of my dad's. They drank scotch together at the country club every other Friday. If Jack needed a document backdated and officially stamped to make it look like a year-old trust fund, Reed would do it without blinking, especially if Jack promised to move his remaining personal capital through Reed's branch. But backdating a piece of paper was one thing. Forging the digital trail to match it was another. If my dad had told the FBI that I was blackmailing Valerie, he would need proof of communication. He would need digital evidence that I was pulling the strings. I had locked Valerie's iPad, intercepted her WhatsApp web chats, and recorded her keystrokes. But I hadn't been watching my father's devices. I had assumed he was financially illiterate. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes as a wave of nausea washed over me. He didn't just backdate the trust. He must have seeded fake correspondence on the Home Office computer. He must have typed out documents or emails framing me as a co-conspirator, knowing my background script was silently recording every single keystroke. He used my own surveillance tool to manufacture an airtight alibi, creating a digital record that showed me demanding money from the Apex supply accounts. That's why Callum's tone had changed. The FBI forensic accountants weren't just looking at the screenshots of Valerie moving the money. They were looking at the raw keystroke logs. And buried in those logs, mixed in with Valerie's genuine theft, were breadcrumbs Jack had deliberately left for them to find. I started the car. The engine whined in protest before settling into a rough idle. I threw it into gear and pulled out of the parking lot, heading south, away from the district office, away from my apartment, and definitely away from the FBI field office. I needed an unmonitored terminal. I couldn't go back to Garrett. If Callum was tracking my digital footprint, the school district's network would be the first place he looked. I couldn't go to a public library because they required a state ID to log into the computer labs. I drove for 40 minutes, winding through the suburban sprawl until I crossed into the neighboring county. I pulled into the parking lot of a massive, sterile corporate hotel, the kind that catered to regional sales conferences and board consultants. I parked in the back, grabbed the folder and my flash drive, and walked into the lobby through the side entrance. The air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice, making my collarbone ache fiercely. I ignored the front desk and walked straight toward the signs pointing to the business center. It was a small room with glass walls, housing 3 generic Dell workstations and an industrial printer. 2 of the computers were empty. A man in a wrinkled suit was sitting at the third, aggressively typing an email. I sat down at the furthest terminal, wiggling the mouse to wake the screen. It didn't require a login, just a click to accept the hotel's terms of service. I slid the SanDisk SanDisk flash drive into the USB port. The drive folder popped up on the screen. I didn't open the video files. I didn't care about the screenshots of the Cayman transfers anymore. I opened the raw text files, the pure, unformatted keystroke logs spanning 18 months. I hit Ctrl+F to open the search function. I typed in my own name. The system froze for a second, processing the massive text document. Then, it highlighted the first result. Date, November 12. Time, 11:45 p.m. User session, admin. I stared at the text on the screen. The keystrokes read, "Tell her we need the next 15K by Friday or I send the logs to the DA." My stomach dropped. I scrolled to the next result. Date, January 4. Time, 02:10 a.m. User session, admin. The trust account is set up. Keep funneling the Apex payouts there. If Silas asks, tell him it's corporate tax overhead. It was all there. Pages and pages of it. Late night sessions, typed when Valerie was asleep and I was safely in my own apartment across town. Jack had been sitting in the dark home office, logging in as the administrator, and having entirely fabricated one-sided conversations on a secure notepad app, knowing my script was quietly logging every word. He didn't even have to send the messages. He just had to type them on the screen, let the spyware record the strokes, and then delete the file. To an FBI forensic analyst, it looked exactly like I was drafting blackmail demands and tracking my cut of the stolen money. I had built the perfect cage for Valerie, and my father had simply changed the lock and thrown me inside. I pulled the flash drive out of the terminal. The man in the wrinkled suit glanced over at me, annoyed by the sudden movement, before going back to his typing. I gathered Fletcher's folder, walked out of the business center, and went straight to the hotel lobby's house phone. I dialed Fletcher's office number. A receptionist answered on the first ring, her voice tight and stressed. "Vance and Fletcher, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to Mr. Fletcher," I said. "Tell him it's the woman from the diner." "Mr. Fletcher is currently unavailable," the receptionist said mechanically. "Our offices are closed for an internal audit." "Listen to me," I said, leaning my forehead against the cool wood of the phone alcove. "I know the FBI took his drives. Tell him I found the fabrication. I know how Jack faked the trust communication. I just need 10 seconds with him." There was a long pause, a click. Then Fletcher's voice came on the line, sounding exhausted. "They have a warrant for your arrest," Fletcher said. "Obstruction, extortion, and accessory to wire fraud. A federal judge signed it 20 minutes ago. You're a fugitive." I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I just placed the heavy plastic receiver back onto the metal hook and stood in the freezing hotel lobby, listening to the muffled ambient jazz playing from the ceiling speakers. A fugitive. Jack had actually done it. He had taken the federal hammer I built to smash Valerie, caught it mid-swing, and handed it directly to a judge with my name on the handle. And it made perfect sense. The FBI didn't know me. To them, I was just a disgruntled daughter with a history of family conflict, sitting on a mountain of illegal wiretaps. Panic is a physical thing. It starts in your stomach, cold and heavy, and creeps up your throat until you can't swallow. I felt it rising. I thought about walking out the glass doors, getting back into the Civic, and driving until the gas ran out. I could throw the flash drive in a river. I could disappear. But my shoulder throbbed, a sharp, metallic grind of titanium and bone, reminding me of the concrete basement stairs. He stepped over me. He looked down at me like I was trash on his rug, and he stepped over me. I stopped breathing for a second, forcing the panic down. I closed my eyes. I am a network administrator. I spend 50 hours a week troubleshooting complex, sprawling digital architectures for a school district with thousands of users. I find the broken code. I track the missing packets. I isolate the corrupted files. Jack Harlow was a 60-year-old dirt and diesel contractor who typed with his index fingers and still called his browser the Google. He was trying to outsmart me in my own environment. I turned around and walked straight back into the business center. The man in the wrinkled suit was gone. The room was empty. I sat down at the terminal I had just vacated, woke the screen, and plugged the black SanDisk drive back into the USB port. When you build a script to capture a screen, it doesn't just capture the active window. Unless you specifically tell it to crop the feed, it captures the entire desktop real estate, every pixel. My dad's home office had a dual monitor setup. I didn't open the raw text files this time. I opened the media folder. 500 gigabytes of high-definition PNG image files, cataloged by date and time. I navigated to the folder for November. I scrolled down to November 12th. I found the batch of screenshots time-stamped 11:45 p.m., the exact minute the first fake blackmail demand was typed into the Notepad app. I double-clicked the first image file. It opened in the default photo viewer. The image spanned both of the desktop's monitors. On the left monitor, sitting dead center, was the Notepad application. The cursor was blinking at the end of the sentence. "Tell her we need the next 15K by Friday or I send the logs to the DA." It looked damning, but I didn't care about the left monitor. I dragged the image over, zooming in on the right monitor. Jack hadn't bothered to close his other applications. Why would he? He thought the spyware was my problem, my tool. He had no idea how it functioned. On the right monitor, sitting completely maximized in full 1080p resolution, was an active, logged-in session of his Charles Schwab private wealth account. The header clearly displayed "Welcome, Jack Harlow," but that wasn't enough. A good defense attorney could argue he had left his browser open, and I had snuck in and used his computer. I looked at the system tray in the bottom right corner of the screen. The Bluetooth icon was active. I clicked to the next screenshot, taken 5 seconds later when his mouse had hovered over the taskbar. The hover state tooltip for the Bluetooth icon was clearly visible in the capture. Connected devices. Jack's hearing aids. I let out a breath that sounded like a ragged laugh. He was wearing his Bluetooth hearing aids. They auto-connected to the desktop whenever he sat in the leather office chair, a feature I had personally set up for him 3 years ago so he could watch YouTube videos without waking Valerie. The system logged the physical proximity of his medical device. At the exact millisecond the extortion note was being typed. I kept clicking through the timeline. January January 4th, 02:10 a.m. The night he typed the fake logs about the trust account. I opened the corresponding screenshot. Same dual monitor setup. This time, the right screen showed an open Outlook email draft. He was halfway through writing an email to Reed Whitfield, the notary public. Reed, see you at the club at 9. Need that paperwork stamped today. The date is crucial. He was drafting his own alibi and coordinating the fraudulent trust document at the exact same time, on the exact same machine, completely oblivious to the fact that my background script was capturing every single pixel of his arrogance. I didn't just have proof that I was innocent. I had the digital smoking gun proving Jack committed perjury, forged federal evidence, and colluded to obstruct a federal investigation. I sat back in the cheap plastic chair. The panic was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline calm. I opened the hotel's web browser and navigated to the district court's public directory. It took me 2 minutes to find the name of the federal prosecutor assigned to Valerie Harlow's embezzlement case, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Durbin. I opened a new tab, logged into a secure, encrypted Proton mail account I kept for district emergencies, and started drafting an email. I didn't write a novel. I wrote it like a network diagnostic report. To ASA Sarah Durbin CC, Special Agent Callum, FBI Cybercrimes Division Subject, Supplemental Evidence, USV, Valerie Harlow, / Jack Harlow Federal Warrants Ms. Durbin, I have been made aware of an active warrant for my arrest based on supplemental filings provided by Jack Harlow. Those filings rely on keystroke logs he claims indicate my involvement in an extortion scheme. Jack Harlow fabricated those logs. Attached to this email are the raw, uncropped dual monitor screenshots from the exact timestamps the alleged extortion demands were typed. Please note the secondary monitor in the November 12 file, displaying Mr. Harlow's active Charles Schwab session, as well as the system tray indicating his personal Bluetooth hearing aids were connected to the terminal, confirming his physical presence at the keyboard. Please note the secondary monitor in the January 4th file, displaying an email draft to Reed Whitfield, coordinating the fraudulent backdating of the Harlow Beneficiary Trust. I am the one who built the screen recorder. I am the one who handed you the flash drive. I did not do it to extort my family. I did it because I saw a crime. I am currently sitting in the business center of the Marriott off Interstate 84. I will wait in the lobby. I attached the specific PNG files. I attached the trust document photocopy Fletcher had given me. I attached the WhatsApp transcripts where Valerie and Silas explicitly discussed Jack's cooperation in the early days of the shell company setup. I reviewed the attachments one last time. Then I clicked send. I ejected the SanDisk drive, slipped it back into my pocket, and stood up. I left Fletcher's folder sitting on the desk next to the keyboard. I didn't need it anymore. I walked out of the business center and into the expansive, aggressively air-conditioned hotel lobby. There was a small Starbucks kiosk in the corner. I walked over, bought a black coffee with the last crumpled $5 bill in my scrub pocket, and took a seat in one of the oversized leather armchairs facing the main glass doors. The coffee was burnt and lukewarm. It tasted incredible. I didn't know how long it would take. Federal bureaucracy moves slowly, but a U.S. attorney realizing her star victim has just committed massive perjury on her docket tends to light a fire. 45 minutes later, 3 unmarked black SUVs pulled into the hotel's circular driveway, blocking the valet lane. The doors opened, and 5 people in tactical windbreakers stepped out. Agent Callum was leading them. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly embarrassed. They walked through the sliding glass doors, their eyes scanning the lobby. I didn't run. I didn't even stand up. I just raised my left hand, giving a small, tired wave from the leather chair. Callum saw me. He signaled the other agents to lower their posture. He walked over to my chair alone, stopping a few feet away. He looked at my hospital scrubs, the muddy sneakers, and the rigid way I was holding my right shoulder. We received your email, Callum said quietly. I know, I replied. Asa Durbin has rescinded the warrant for your arrest, he said, keeping his voice low so the hotel concierge wouldn't hear. She's also authorized a new warrant for Jack Harlow and a subpoena for Reed Whitfield. Are you going to arrest me anyway? I asked, taking a sip of the burnt coffee. No, Callum said. He let out a long, heavy breath, suddenly looking as tired as I felt. But I do need you to come with us to the field office. As a cooperating witness, we need you to walk our forensics team through the dual monitor capture protocols. Your father's attorney, Mr. Fletcher, is currently sitting in one of our interview rooms, eager to corroborate everything you just sent. I nodded slowly. I set the coffee cup down on the small glass table. I'll need to stop at a pharmacy, I told him, looking up into his eyes. My pain medication was in my apartment when my dad locked me out. Callum's expression softened into something resembling actual human empathy. We'll get you whatever you need, Ms. Harlow. My car is right outside. I stood up. My collarbone sent a blinding spike of pain down my arm, but I kept my posture straight. I didn't look back at the business center. I just walked toward the sliding glass doors, stepping out of the freezing lobby and into the bright, suffocating heat of the afternoon. Jack Harlow had built his whole life on the belief that if you push people hard enough, they eventually break and stay down. He thought he could bury me in that basement, and when that failed, he thought he could bury me in federal court. He never realized that when you shove someone down into the dark, you give them a perfect view of the foundation, and foundations can be dismantled, one keystroke at a time.